Welcome to episode 65 of the Coast to Coast AFL podcast with Nick and Blaze. I am Blaze, your host, and this week it was a pretty easy round to tip. Everyone, pretty much all across the board, majority of people got their tips correct. I made a blunder with the Hawthorn North Melbourne game. We will talk about that a bit later on. That was completely accidental, but it is what it is. Um, a lot of players kicked some bags. A lot of key forwards kicked about 5 goals, except for a certain midfielder, which we will talk about as well. But otherwise, it's been a pretty interesting week, and let's jump straight into it. How are you doing, Mr. Cyrek?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. I'm finally on the mend. I haven't got that abdominal pain issue that I've had before.
Yay!
Um, yeah, which is absolutely great news. Apart from that, uh, yeah, been off chasing all these other minor things during the week, and yeah, it was good to actually sit down on the weekend, watch a bit of the football. As you mentioned, all the favorites won, but there were some interesting contests that I'm very happy to
Sure.
dissect through. So yeah, how about you, Blazy?
Yeah, my week was pretty eventful. So on Friday I did my usual plasma donation. On Saturday I was out pretty much all day for Pokemon Go Fest. So I went out with a couple of friends for that. So I didn't actually get to watch any of the games, which is kind of sad because I know there were some pretty good gut ones on Saturday. I was boots on
Mm.
ground for Richmond v Adelaide on Sunday. The result was as it was expected. But I'm pretty happy with a couple of boys who definitely tried their hearts out. We'll talk about that when we get around to it. I also saw the St Kilda Freo game. I saw about the second half of the St Kilda Freo game, and that was a really close contest. We will talk about that as well.
Mm.
And yeah, otherwise this has been a pretty easy week. Not
Yeah,
too much,
absolutely.
not too much going on.
I did actually get 7 out of 7 this week.
You did.
I do thank it being a perfect round up until that point because I changed off my St Kilda tip, which I still think was justified as a hunch.
I
We'll get
as,
through that later, but
as much as I like to stick by what my best friend told me is that if you tip them, you're going to be disappointed, and if you don't tip them, you'll be disappointed. But in that
yeah,
case, I do think it was justified because of how close it was in that fourth.
yeah, I think the two games I had hunches going maybe the other way or closer than people expect
Mm.
did actually happen.
Yeah.
Although in the first game, I thought it was going to be a bit closer,
You know, I
and you know
well,
what?
you want to know what my margin was for this one? Before we get started on it, my margin was like
What do
17
you?
points.
Yeah, I had it on 19. I didn't have much faith,
Yeah, I
but
was expecting it to be so much closer, but well, since we're talking about it, we may as well jump straight in to the Thursday night clash over at the Adelaide Oval between Port Adelaide and Carlton.
yeah, so one of my mates in real life, I mean, all you people are in real life and my friends, but in terms of close to me, sent him a text before the game. He's a Carlton fan, and we both just had a shared non-confidence in our team. And yeah, it's fair to say I didn't really text him that much afterwards because after the first 2 quarters, especially, yeah, it was just a bit embarrassing. Obviously, both teams didn't perform all that well last week, but at least Port showed up
Mm.
to try and prove that it was a state they've stabilized a bit. Last week was kind of an aberration,
Mm-hmm.
and they still at least want to attack the finals, despite their slim and tough road to do it. We'll do a breakdown of the rounds closer to the finals when it gets there, but
Yes.
they might be in touch. However, Carlton will not be in touch, and they were just diced up early and couldn't figure out how to stop any of Port's ball movement. Um, yeah, the first half is what killed it for them.
Mm-hmm.
8 unanswered goals before Carlton's first goal late in the second quarter, and Carlton were completely outmarked. Allowed half of Port's score at halftime to be kicked from the half back line, so couldn't do anything to stop their movement across the ground. In fact, with only 5 possessions in Port's forward half, Rosie managed 8 score involvements and 5 score launches for the entire game, as he graciously let Miles Bergman take his middle time and increase his contract value. There may be news that is re-signing soon. I've got my fingers crossed.
Well,
Um,
definitely a
but
player you want to keep a
yeah,
hold of, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was very harsh last week. I was pretty salty after the Port game last week. So you know what I mean. I was like, yeah, like if he's gonna have a few games like that, maybe he's not as worth it. But I think overall, I do really want him to sign on for Port.
His
But yeah,
upside is better than his downside.
oh, absolutely. Um, but at least for Carlton, they did apply some pressure in the second half.
Mhm.
Their goal kicking was a lot better. Some nice long set shots and some tougher general play goals. But they, as I said, they were just a defensive sieve the whole night. And Port were just able to do what they want to do for the majority of the night. And yeah, as I said, it was one of those games where it was probably like the media sinking their teeth because, it's Carlton, lights are on them, and they just put up a whimper.
Yeah, it's not looking good over at over Icon Park.
Mm.
There's all this talk and news about whether Vossi will lose his job or not. That still remains to be seen. There's still plenty of games left to play out in the season. We were looking at it just before we started recording. This kind of how many coaches they've had in the past 10 years. They've technically had five, as I believe Malthouse left Carlton either in the middle of the 2015 season or at the just at the end. Um, and the fact that it's each of their coaches have kind of had like a 3 year stint and that's it. It's not a good
Mm.
track record in terms of like them keeping coaches around long term. This is something that Richmond used to do back in the 90s and
Mm.
the early 2000s when they were terrible. Um, but it's just I don't know if it really is a coaching thing. I don't know if it's a playing thing. I don't know if it's just everything all together and the entire club just needs to be scrubbed for a bit. But it's not currently looking good.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm most concerned about is because I mean, it's not often said like, oh, Carlton, they're like bottom 6, 7 players just aren't up to snuff. And like, I'll admit that, that's part of the problem.
Mm.
But again, it's just the defensive efforts. And, it's not just tackling or whatever, because I must admit, in the first quarter, I will give it to Carlton. They did try and attack the way that Port normally play. They were protecting the corridor, and that's fair. Port often go in there. They
Mm-hmm.
often turn the ball far back by trying to go too aggressive straight away. But once Port just kicked wide, and it wasn't about defending that, they just look confused in which areas to defend. If things don't go right
Yeah.
for them, they just don't seem to know what to do to respond. And maybe that's coaching. Maybe that's just not having good years in any of those probably 10 years you were talking about. I mean, none of those years I would have said Carlton were a good defensive team.
No.
Um, Last year, obviously, they sort of, they've always had good backline, but they've just let runs of goal against them.
Yeah,
And
what they've always struggled with a lot is forward defensive efforts and midfield defensive efforts. And whilst I feel like
yeah,
I think part of what they're missing massively this year is a little bit of personnel. So apart from their injuries,
mm,
of course, like they're missing Kennedy, they're missing Owies because
mm,
they've gone to other clubs. Owies maybe a little bit less, but Kennedy definitely. Um,
yeah,
but there's that, and then there's just it feels like the whole midfield group has just lost a bit of cohesion in terms of how they're meant to structure and
mm,
how like just kind of everything really.
yeah. And look, and I also make the point because we have mentioned it before. Three good midfielders, and yet only one could really stamp their authority on the game. And I said that was George Hewitt. Um, Even TDK, he won a few clearances and all that. Sorry, he did some nice tap, broke a few clearances, but even he wasn't that influential. So you really had George Hewitt, the only four-quarter performer. Cripps sort of got into the game late,
Mm.
and Chera was like a bit of a stinker that game. So, despite winning the ground ball gets, is again an area where you could beat Port. Is just structure and poor disposal led them to short, often intercepted chains.
Yeah.
And, as I said, despite them winning the clearances, they were absolutely thrashed in terms of score from stoppage. It was 8-4 to Port, 2-7 to Carlton, 3-2 to 1-3 from centre bounce scores. So, you can say, oh, they don't have enough areas around the ground where it's not getting done. But the centre is a problem for Carlton. It's a lot worse than last year. There's a few teams, in fact, this might be a mini theme for the episode, but teams that were solid in areas last year that have just dropped off. And it's definitely the midfield for Carlton.
Yeah, for sure. Because we know that if Kerner and Mackay can get hands on that ball, they will most likely convert. So I don't think that's necessarily an issue. And if they can't, they usually bring it to ground. But there's no defensive effort at their feet. There's no decent midfield to forward transition anymore. It's just the whole thing is just out of whack, and it's we want to see every team succeed realistically. Like a tight, intense competition is what makes AFL interesting. But when you see a club like this that's basically suffered for the past 30 odd years, like what there's got to be something. Like, is it a board issue at this point if it's been on for that long? Because it can't always just be. I mean, granted, a lot of it is technically on coaching, really, but there's got to be something else for it to be this long of an issue.
Yeah, I think it's less. As I said, I think it was in the late 10s. The sort of players that Carlton were recruiting, like your Zach Williams, like your even Chera, I suppose. It was all midfield offensively based. They, they had some good defenders. Obviously they developed Liam Jones into a defender. Unfortunately lost him. They recruited serviceable players like Marchbank. They've even got Haynes in.
Haynes has done really well this season, to be fair.
Yeah, I actually thought he was one of the best performers for Carlton on that night. I think he's one of maybe 3 players I would say could hold his head up high. But you know what I mean? It's weird because they set up this really nice defense. They set up the game plan for offensive-based movement. And yet it's also the most basic attack. It's the least complex game plan they have because they are very Kerno focused. They don't have much ground ball presence. They don't have much forward 50 lock. So it's like a hodgepodge of lines that should be okay, but just don't get much value. I think that's the main thing for Carlton is they probably get the least amount of value out of players, especially this season.
Oh yeah, 100%. But we can talk about some of the players they have somewhat gotten value out of, at least in this game. But before I talk about Carlton, I will talk about Port Adelaide, of course. Starting with Mitch Georgiades. What an absolute monster of a game he had once again. Really composed in front of goal this week. Kicking 5-2 from 11 disposals. 5 contested possessions, 6 marks, with 4 of them being inside 50. 9 score involvements and 3 1%ers. Miles Bergman, as we have briefly talked about, potential contract extension coming up, was very solid around the ground. He kicked 2 goals from 25 touches, 10 contested possessions, 8 marks, 6 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 6 score involvements, 5 tackles, 17 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, 463 metres gained. And down in defence, Bigasava Radagalia kept the backline in check, finishing with 13 disposals, 11 of them effective, equating to 84.6% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 11 intercepts, 6 marks, with 4 of them being intercept marks, 8 1%ers, and 7 spoils. On the Carlton side, as we had mentioned, George Hewitt gave it his all, pretty much best on ground for them, collecting 21 touches, 16 effective, equating to 76.2% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 3 inside 50s, 5 clearances, 6 score involvements, 9 tackles, and 25 pressure acts. Orazio Fantasia was their leading scorer, slotting 2-2 from 13 disposals, 4 contested possessions, 4 marks, with 2 of them being inside 50, 2 inside 50s, and 7 score involvements. And then shout-outs to their 2 debutants that they also had this week. Flynn Young, who finished with 5 touches, 3 inside 50s, 3 score involvements, and 9 pressure acts. And Billy Wilson, who finished with 7 touches, 2 tackles, and 12 pressure acts. On the injury front, Adam Saad did leave the game with a concussion, so he will not be playing this week. And on the MRO front, Lockie Jones and Charlie Kerno were both fined $1,000 for engaging in a melee.
Yeah, so as I said, yeah, in terms of the general context, it's like, well, hang on a bit, but I think the best thing about them is like, well, they've got some good teams coming up to see if they can, maybe threaten for finals, but I think it's about having those adjusted game plans because this was definitely a step in the right direction. I know Hinkley's sometimes it takes a game for him to correct things, and Sydney was that aberration. Um, but you know what I mean. If we can get competitive things, we'll get a few more forward players back, especially hopefully, fingers crossed for uh, Lukosius.
Yes. He
Um,
was meant to be on track to come back just after the bye. I think they've had to take
well,
another week
yeah,
or two just to.
yeah, it's one of those things where they've put him in the sample, so he's playing that. But he was on 2 to 3 weeks for a few extra weeks because of
True.
a bit of a back complication. So yeah, as I said, so it's one of those things where it's like I'm not going to be that optimistic about Port against a lot of these top teams, but if they can at least go through 50-50, just pretend like they're gunning for finals, just show a bit of pride.
Yeah.
Like I know it seems like a bit of a lost year, but yeah, sometimes it's at least better to I think it will be good because, as I said, just that first half of the year when Port were getting absolutely smashed by the better teams, that's just got to stop. Otherwise, yeah, as I said, this will be a wasted year. Where now, looking at the back half, it's like, well, maybe Port can at least get something out of it.
And even if even if Port don't actually make finals, I can still at least play spoiler to teams that are trying to vie either for a final spot or are trying to vie for a specific position in that top eight.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, they'd love to get another. They would love to get a showdown win, especially if it meant knocking the Crows out of the top four. And as I said, there's a lot of teams that they've come up against that have beaten them soundly in the past. So again, it may be a bit of pride. I think it's a bit deluded to think that they're actually going to make finals. I think it's very much a 3-horse race for 8.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you want them to approach it like they do think they have a genuine chance to.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, jumping over to our next game, our Friday night clash up at the SCG. It's Sydney hosting the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah, and this one, again, we sort of alluded to it before. People are thinking, oh yeah, Bulldogs should get it done. But we will give Sydney a lot of credit, especially early on. They actually looked to have a lot of the play. It was a high turnover game, fairly scrappy. And honestly, they were repeating this mistakes of last week because it was a lot of misses in, I think, the first half, especially the first quarter. Until in the third quarter, it turned into a very good contest. A lot of great individual performances. Probably the most individual players that had amazing games in this one. And yeah, it was high scoring and a very clutch win by the Bulldogs as they vitally win their second to last non-Victorian game in exciting fashions. I didn't read the score, Blazy.
Yeah, I know.
The
I just
Carlton
let you
score
go.
was 110 to 60, 16-14 to 8-12. This game was 14-12, 96 to 16-9, 105. So early on, obviously it was Sam Darcy that tore up. Got the early jump on the Pelican.
Mm-hmm.
Pelican actually came back into the game. Aaron Norton decided to kick some. And as I said, probably the biggest one to separate these two teams in the second half was Joel Frazier. He started the first half with an okay 12 disposals and 2 score involvements and tore it up with 4 second half goals, 11 disposals at 100% disposal efficiency. Defensive afterthought game. The Doggies might be a bit concerned how often they let Sydney Bold move their ball into their forward 50. As I said, the Dogs aren't always great when they lose the inside 50 battle.
Mm-hmm.
They don't concede a lot of scores against, but they also don't concede a lot of inside 50s. they defend up the ground by forward half dominance. But again, it was just that 4-10 from set shots that killed Sydney. And despite them amazingly getting 10-2 from general play, it was just a game where neither team could miss from ground ball opportunities. There was a lot of great general play goals.
Yeah, there was. It was such an interesting game to watch because it was we love a good tussle, right? We love a good back and forth. Very much a solid sharpshooter kind of game. We always love games like that. But the fact that Sydney finally look like the team that they were meant to look like at the start of the year is great, especially up against a top 8 contender like the Bulldogs. Like they can still very much not necessarily threaten for a spot in finals. I don't think this year they will make it at all, but
no,
they can at least they're in a good position now to where they can upset a couple of teams like Port Adelaide. They're in a good position where they can upset a couple of other teams vying for those spots.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, again, if you're a Sydney fan, you wanted them to trade him because I think they're in the same boat in terms of wins. I think, yeah, there's a slightly worse percentage than Port, but oh, sorry, no, Port's got one more win and worse percentage.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll go through the ladder later.
We will.
Since it's almost even, obviously, with Essendon and Gold Coast throwing a wrench into that. But yeah, as I said, it's just good to see them come together a bit more. They're starting to get players back, and you know, they just look far more threatening because they're a lot more mobile. And it's obviously the two players playing a really good game, as I mentioned last week. They sort of were more teething games, whereas this week, Papley and Goulden. Great running game. Papley looked pretty much unimpeded, unlike last week.
Mm-hmm.
And Goulden actually had the sort of game he was having last year. He was absolutely fantastic on the wings. It allowed Lloyd to get a bit more creative. I think he's struggled a lot to play full games on the wing. And, you know, when he was able to shuffle that with Goulden, you know, he sort of got into attack. He did miss a few, but I thought it was very creative the way they brought him into the game.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, since their forward lineup is still a bit missing a few tall players. At least this game style, you know, it seems a lot more able to score points. And I know, look, the Bulldogs, they're not crush off defensively. Rory Lobb tried his best. But O'Donnell and Caulfield aren't bona fide stars yet. You know?
Yeah, that's true.
Caulfield, obviously, you know, he's just a fringe player that's filling a role fairly well at the moment. And O'Donnell is emerging. I think he'll keep on building, but you know what I mean? He's just still just decent at filling his role right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, as I said, Sydney were able to get a bit from them, which I think they'll find, but it's weird. I still think the Dogs will like take a bit away from them, because they're pretty much a bottom tier team. Once you like assault for their inside 50s, for defense. You know, when they're in terms of per inside 50s for a lot of stats, they are pretty low on a lot of them. Like conceding marks inside 50s, rebound rates, I think is. They don't rebound the ball out of their defense a lot. They, I think it scores per inside 50 is fairly high.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what I mean? It's like, you know, they are still at least trying to get the most out of them. And you know what? They kept Sydney to a lot of ground ball stuff. You know, some of their set shots were hard, sorry. And I'm not saying that was an excuse to why they missed so much, because they were just flat out bad in some areas. But you know what I mean? I think sometimes, like, really good teams with these deficits, you know, because obviously, like, as I said, the Bulldogs, despite being in the premiership window for attack and defend, I do think they're maybe the 7th worst defense in the league, if not maybe a bit worse than that. But it just never seems to bother them. And, you know, in a game like this, where the inside 50 differential evens up a bit, they're able to do just enough.
Yeah.
do separate those two teams. And, just make it harder for Sydney, put the pressure on them, and it led to a lot of misses, and maybe they won this game just by some of those defensive efforts. Again, not fantastic. They didn't smother anyone, but it was just systematically good enough to make it a bit harder.
This is true. This is very, very true. Like the fact that they're able to kind of brush off the inconsistencies that they have in defense, and just able to immediately kind of switch their offensive game. It pretty much makes up for it, because the fact that they're that good when they have their offensive game going, it's crazy how easy they're able to make that switch.
Like, I know Moneyball is like very overused in sports terminology, but the Bulldogs definitely embrace that mindset where they've just literally put all their stocks in offensive production, and as long as they can outscore their opponents, defense doesn't matter.
And it's not like they don't have defensive efforts, because they have fairly decent defensive midfielders. Their forward line in terms of defense isn't too bad. Like obviously it's their defense, like their actual back six, that's kind of like letting them down a little bit up against, like,
I wouldn't say letting them down, but they're raw when it comes to literal.
Yeah, they don't have
three,
as much experience.
I mean, even Lob is technically a 1-year defender.
True. Great, yeah. Well, once he finally got an actual defensive preseason under his belt, he has looked like it definitely helped him a lot.
I think he's honestly playing better than last year. I know he hasn't had a lot more intercepts, but he is defensively accountable.
100%. He's doing really, really well in terms of one-on-ones. Again, he's become a really solid intercept defender. So he's definitely tracking pretty well now as a defender rather than as a forward. But speaking of the Dogs, shall I jump over to our individuals?
Let's.
So I'm going to start with one of the big men up forward. It's not the one you're thinking of. It's Aaron Norton. He managed to convert pretty well up forward this week, kicking 3-2 from 18 disposals, 9 contest possessions, 12 marks with 7 of them inside 50, 9 score involvements, 4 tackles, 14 pressure acts, and 3 1%ers. Lucky Bramble was very important with ball movement, kicking 1 goal from 28 touches, 22 of them effective, equating to 78.6% efficiency, 5 contest possessions, 4 marks, 5 inside 50s, 6 score involvements, 16 pressure acts, and 653 meters gained. And Joel Frazier impressed around the ground once again. He's having a hell of a season. He kicked 4 goals from 23 disposals, 20 of them effective, equating to 87% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 7 marks, 2 clearances, 9 score involvements, 23 pressure acts. Over on the Swan side, James Jordan shut down Ed Richards really well in another tagging role. He kicked a goal as well from 11 touches, 5 contested possessions, 2 clearances, 3 score involvements, 10 tackles, with 3 of them being inside 50, 20 pressure acts, and 2 1%ers. Brody Grundy dominated the ruck, getting 43 hitouts with 14 of them to advantage, and kicked 1-1 from 23 disposals, 17 of them effective, equating to 73.9% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 6 marks, 3 inside 50s, 8 clearances, 2 goal assists, 11 score involvements, 4 tackles, 3 1%ers, and 3 spoils. And then Isaac Heaney, he continued to be the hero. He's done so much for the Swans this year, despite the fact that they have had no forward line for him to work with, so he's had to be creative and do it all himself. He kicked 5 goals from 21 touches, 18 of them effective, equating to 85.7% efficiency, 10 contested possessions, 4 inside 50, 6 clearances, 9 score involvements, 5 tackles, and 23 pressure acts. On the injury front, Tom Papley came off the ground with calf tightness. I believe it was sometime in the second half. And Tom McCartan was a late change with illness. That is meant to say illness and not injury. Just less ambiguity, I promise. On the MRO front, there's a couple for this game. Tom Papley was also fined $1,000 for instigating a melee. Sounds like him. Isaac Heaney was fined $2,000 for striking Ed Richards. Aaron Francis was fined $2,000 for engaging in a melee. Rory Lobb was fined $2,000 for engaging in a melee, and Aaron Francis was also suspended for 1 match for striking Lockie Bramble.
Yeah, as I said, obviously Aaron Francis isn't that linchpin of that forward line, but it's another suspension for Sydney. They've had a few. Anytime they get momentum, it feels like there's always a player that comes out. But yeah, Francis just had a a bit of a heated game, to be honest. I don't know what Lob got into his head. But yeah, they went at it. Which is strange because Rob can get angry, but it's not like a melee sort of angry. He just like gets very frustrated in himself. So it was kind of interesting to see them get heated, tangle up against each other. Honestly, pretty good wrestling technique too. I wouldn't want to face either of them on the mat, you know.
No, you don't want. You don't want to go
I
into
think
a
I'll
ring
just
with
take
any
the
of them.
ring out. I think I'll be crawling to get out in the dojo.
Oh yeah, you'd have to be begging for them to ring the bell.
Yeah, exactly. Tap out before the contact, I reckon. But yeah. Thankfully though, no fines for instigating a contact to the umpire yet.
Oh,
So
hang on,
we'll see
they're
if we
coming.
can keep that streak going.
Unfortunately, they were coming. We got
They
lucky in
were
the first two
coming.
games.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it was a bit antsy this week. I don't know.
yeah, there was
Yeah, there was
a
just
lot more
something
fights
about it.
going on than umpire touching this week.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
let's start off by going over to our Saturday games now. Heading up onto the Gold Coast, the People First Stadium, where the Suns hosted the Demons.
yeah, I only watched the first probably first quarter and a half, and yeah, I honestly thought, I honestly thought Melbourne might have been able to put up a more embarrassing performance than Carlton did, because it's an understatement to how bad that first quarter was. It was 12 shots to 2, 5-6 to 0-1, 15 more inside 50s to the Gold Coast, who registered 21 to 6, and only 23% time in Melbourne's forward half. It looked like it was only going to be a bloodbath. Bad kicking was the only thing that kept the D's, I wouldn't even say close, but you know what I mean, like even remotely in the same hemisphere. But to the D's credit, they came out strong in the second, blocked off the outside run that helped the Gold Coast rack up that uncontested possession, like they did in the first quarter. And, they actually gave them a few issues. One primarily being the absolute belting that Jake Melksham gave out to an out-of-form Mac Andrews. He eventually kicked 5-6 and 3 goals in the second, which brought Melbourne back to life. That's what sort of spurred him into this game. However, the thing that killed it for Melbourne is the 23 total shots, set shots allowed, and 19 marks inside 50. May, talking about out-of-form defenders, having a bit of a season himself. I think it was put out there that he has had the most goals kicked directly against him out of any key defender this season. I haven't been tracking that myself, but I think it's something like up to the 40s, I think, so far. Which, it's pretty mediocre in the one-on-ones. I think he's at a 30% loss rate, which is about where he was in his debut years. I think I actually took that out in my second segment because I feel bad about it, but I mentioned that now since we're talking about it. So
yeah, may as well.
Again, it's just, it's a bit weird. It's, again, going back to that theme, Melbourne defensively, they were pretty great last year. They're a bit stinky this year. So as I said, despite the comeback, they were never really ever a threat to take this game away from the Gold Coast. But it was good to see them get some offensive presence back. And it was a pretty fun arm wrestle in the center. There was almost 100 points scored in this game from stoppage, and 38 points scored in total from center bounce. That went 4-1 to the Gold Coast to 2-1 to Melbourne. And everyone that wasn't a ruckman, who at least was 50% center bounces, scored at least 5 score involvements. So very much generated from the middle. The final score was, in fact, 15-14, 104 to 12-13, 85. And again, I think it's just a pass for Melbourne. Like, you wouldn't want any more, like a quarter being that terrible, while it is inexcusable. The fact that it was 3 quarters They didn't let this game go late. They continued through it. At least counts for something.
Yeah, I think it's a good attempt. Like we know the Suns have been extremely threatening this season. Like obviously they only dropped out of the top 8 once so far. Like
Yeah.
they're tracking still really well. And the fact that Melbourne, despite their hiccups and their lack of defense, from some players, during this season, the fact that they're able to actually take the fight to the Suns and have taken the fight to a couple of other teams as well, and even taken wins off of some of the other good teams, um, shows that like Port, like Sydney, they can be threatening against teams still vying for top 8. It's just whether the
I'd say a
defense
bit less.
can. Well, yeah, like they're the bottom.
Yeah.
They're the bottom team out of like those 3 in that
Yeah.
sort of little segment. But it's just whether like some of their players are going to show up, like Stephen May. Like, is he actually going to get his butt into gear and have a decent season? Jake Lever being out. He's out with injury now, so that's not going to be very helpful to them at all. Oh, sorry, no, he was dropped. Never mind, he was dropped. I just remembered.
Yeah, he was dropped. He hadn't been good.
He's also just out of form, so that's not helpful to them either.
Yeah. And as I said, it was very interesting because Tom McDonald was in okay form. He gets dropped for Lever to come back in, and they didn't even bring him back. So obviously for Melbourne, and this is getting a bit ahead of it, the 2 injuries didn't help, which was Lizzie House and Petty in succession. So it was a lot of Disco Turner, who is probably actually legitimately the best defender at Melbourne at the moment, and not much else. But yeah, as I said, it's just weird, and I think it's a tiny bit systematic as well. It's a tiny bit like Carlton, where it's a bit more of a drop off than we're seeing in other years. Obviously, Melbourne hang their head more on their defense over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
But as I said, they've been, well, we mentioned it in the preseason, they've got a lot of defenders that once they reach that peak and they become too slow, quote unquote, they might find it a bit hard. That's obviously happened all around the same time. And I think that's what we're just seeing here. As I said, they're just not keeping up with it. They're conceding a lot of marks inside 50. And as I said, against the Gold Coast, like, you're not going to win a game against them. Like, they'll run with them for the rest of this game. And they did good to actually bridge some of that gap. But as I said, they're not really ever going to threaten, really.
No, I agree. I think that these are at the point now where they have to start looking to rebuild. Not necessarily completely, because they have like a lot of decent younger and middle mature age players that they can build around. But you look at some of the veterans now, like obviously you got Viney, Oliver, Petrarca, they're getting on. Gone, he's getting pretty close to retirement age. And now you've got Lever and May as well. They're out of form. They're also getting close to retirement age. You've got to start like restructuring your team and try and find new cores to build around.
Yeah, and it's what I sort of say. I wrote my second notes, but I've mentioned a lot of this now. But in terms of how bad this Melbourne's defense has gotten, last year they were the best team, and they only scored a goal 21% of the time. Other teams per inside 50, which was the lowest in the league. That has now increased 7%. Which makes it, I think, the 3rd worst in the league. No, I think it is the worst in the league, actually. I did these notes before all the games had passed, so I don't know if that's changed a bit, but I think it was the worst. And as I mentioned, they now concede the 2nd most amount of marks per inside 50, which, as I said, just has a lot of easy set shots against them. They're the worst rebounding team in the league. They don't get the ball out of their defense. And as I said, the only thing keeping this together for Melbourne is they concede the 4th least amount of inside 50s.
Yeah.
But once it goes in there, they're just absolute sieve. It's not like the Bulldogs. I think that's also why I sort of wrote the Bulldogs the way I did. is like, when you look at the Bulldogs, they're like, okay, they've got a really crap defense, but they're at least set up to prevent it. And now that Melbourne are going from relying on their defense to actually needing to cover that up, they need to work out how to do it. Because that's what's made it switch, you know? Like, once you can't rely it and it becomes a liability, it just flips what you've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years on its head.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the fact that, you know, they won a premiership based entirely around how strong their defense was. And that's just slowly wilted away and just become what we have now. It's definitely the most concerning part, I think, about Melbourne at the moment. Because I think they have some players, some that they've gotten, you know, recently through the draft, and some that they've kind of had for a couple of years on their list that can kind of help bolster their midfield with enough time and experience. Especially once, you know, Oliver, Viney, and like Track kind of
they've got players
on.
like,
They've got Rivers down there.
McPhee,
They've got Sparrow,
Langford, Lindsay.
They've got a ton.
Sparrow's a bit older, but I get what you mean.
Yeah, he's like still on that little bit of a fringe in terms of like the midfield core, but he's not at that point yet to retire. So he's still got a decent possibility of like a leadership position in that midfield.
Yeah, well, as I said, it's just one of those, like, you need that like mid gap to take a few centre bounces, and Sparrow sometimes does that. And I said that's again what you're talking about with Rivers. You know, that will be the sort of transition, but you know, as I said, it'll be interesting to see which of the youngsters they do put in that midfield core, because again, we mentioned if your defense is poor, you actually got to start from the midfield. So as I said, I reckon Judd McPhee might be that person.
Yeah, I think
we've
so.
seen him occasionally go in the midfield. He's a good running player. But again, I still think that's like it might be a next year thing. Once they like figure out who they are, sort of thing, after, you know, a pretty up and down year so far. It may probably even be more up and down than last year, which was a bit of a roller coaster. You know, but yeah, it's just been a bumpy ride for the D's.
Yeah, definitely. But let's jump over to our individuals and talk about the Suns for a little bit more. I'm going to start with Matt Rowell, because he was just doing Matt Rowell things yet again. Bro's just having the time of his life now that he doesn't have to worry about a contract anymore. So good for him. He finishes with 24 disposals, 18 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency, 19 contested possessions, 7 inside 50s, 12 clearances, 9 score involvements, 11 tackles, 37 pressure acts, and 12 ground ball gets. John Noble was elite with Riven coming off of half back. He collected 29 touches, 26 of those effective, equating to 89.7% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 6 marks, 3 inside 50s, 3 clearances, 9 score involvements, 11 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 624 meters gained. And then Ben King converted while up forward, slotting 3-2 from 9 disposals, 6 marks with all of them inside 50, 7 score involvements, and 2 1%ers. He also took a pretty nice pack mark as well. I thought it was pretty cool. This brief mention, don't worry about that. On the other side, as we had mentioned, Jake Melksham kicked 5-6. Almost had a full bag if he was a little bit more accurate. He from 18 touches, those were from 8 contested possessions, 8 marks, with 6 of them being inside 50, 5 inside 50s, 12 score involvements, and 3 tackles, with all of those tackles being inside 50 as well. And then Trent Rivers was good around the ground. He finished with 27 disposals, 19 of those effective, equating to 70.4% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 6 marks, 3 inside 50s, and 5 score involvements. As you had also mentioned, on the injury front, Blake Howes and Harrison Petty both went down with concussion, so they won't play this week. And then on the MRO front, there's a bit here, so give me a minute. I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So Cosy Pickett was fined $3,125 for striking Noah Anderson. Ben King was fined $1,000 for instigating a melee. Clayton Oliver was fined $1,000 for an obscene gesture. We all know what that gesture is. Jack Viney was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. There it is. There's our first one. John Noble, Jed Walter, Bailey Humphrey, Sam Collins, Sam Closey, Stephen May, Christian Salem, and Jake Melcham were all fined $1,000 each for engaging in a big melee. Noah Anderson and Jack Viney were fined $3,125 each for the same thing. I think this was their third offense or fourth offense, which is why it's a higher price. And then Clayton Oliver was also fined $1,875 for engaging in a melee. So the MRO are making a bit of money this week.
Absolutely. And you know what I mean? It's like one of those things where I think, it's a bit weird because, again, it's like a bit testy. And I almost think Gold Coast might have been annoyed how not easily they let Melbourne back in, but how much it sort of disrupted their game plan because it was weird. I honestly, in the first half, I swear it was like what I think Noble and Rioli had like 6 and 5 scoring involvements, and they had like maybe 2 goals from the back half, and then yeah, they just weren't able to generate much from movement afterwards, or not as easily. So I definitely feel like they felt the clamps that Melbourne were able to put on. I mentioned that obviously at the end of the day it wasn't actually going to get that, but I think it's almost good to see that Gold Coast, like, the better we become, the more teams are gonna like plan against us, try and disrupt the way we want to play. And while I don't think like melees are the way to get over it, I think in this game they always like manage to stay that arm's length away. So yeah, I think it was like I wouldn't call it like a mature win, but it's a win that maybe in other years, like maybe Melbourne do come all the way back. They weren't technically that far away, but yeah.
Yeah, it's you can consider this a very, very adult game for the Suns, considering a lot of their growing years, like they're just a bunch of kids, really. Like they're all younger than us for the most. Like half their team is younger than us.
Yeah, that don't
You
like
more so
you
than me,
saying
but
that,
that's
but I guess
besides
that's true.
besides the point. It's a very you're right in
Yeah.
the fact that it is technically like a mature win, but that it shows a lot of growth in the fact that
Yeah.
they're insanely threatening and teams are terrified of that.
Yeah. I actually think that Suns have like a fair few weaknesses. I don't think, again,
Oh
I
yeah,
think I
they're not.
mentioned it a
Then
few
every
weeks
team
ago.
is
I don't think
beatable.
they'll go far in finals, but
They have to make it.
this is setting it up quite nicely. Well, yeah, they might not. I have faith in them, but
Yeah, I think
again, it's going to be a bit of a 3-row. There's going to be one team that has a pretty good season that misses out. I know last year it was 2 teams in Fremantle and Collingwood, but I think it's just going to be
Collingwood
one.
only had a decent second half. Their first half was horrible.
It was very up and down. They technically still had a 13-win season and a draw.
True.
And this final.
Yeah,
anyway.
a lot of those games were
That's
extremely close, so they had a very poor percentage. Which didn't help at all.
That's true.
Anyway, speaking of poor, that's right. Great transition. We're gonna go down to Tassie now. For the quote unquote traditional Tassie clash between 2 teams that are technically not from Tassie, with Hawthorn and North Melbourne in Launceston, so Hawthorn hosting, and it was an 85-point thrashing.
Yeah, it was. 23-12, 150 to 9-11-65. We had mentioned that North post-bye had been looking better defensively. They hadn't conceded 100 points post the bye. However, the 150 points scored by Hawthorn was actually 4 more than they'd let their last 2 opponents combined get to. So it was awful. It happened quickly, and it was on the inside and outside midfield domination of the Hawks. Despite the complete lack of outside game, McKercher, Davies, Uniacke, and Parker sort of just filled the void left by whatever the hell they're up. And it did lead Norf to get some decent, albeit junk time score from their back half. Respectable 6-6, with half their goals being coast to coasters.
Hey,
sorry, half of those are 6-6. 3 goals from the coast to coast. But yeah, it was weird. They had no forward pressure. Yeah, it was pretty much if the ball didn't get the ball didn't get there much anyway. But when it did, it was Nick Larkey versus the world again. Like this was very 2024 North Melbourne forward line. 2023 maybe. I can't remember, but The one where Nick Larkey had a really, really good season and no one else much scored for North. I think that was 2023.
It was primarily 2023, but he did have a very similar year last year as well.
Oh, he's a good player.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt. But yeah, so pretty much, yeah. I mean, you didn't have your Curtises getting involved. Even some of the veterans that they brought in. This was probably one of what's his name? I was about to say Kennedy. Darling's quieter games. So yeah, they just didn't really get much value out of their players, and I don't like using this as like a demonstrative stat, but Hawthorn's sixth worst Supercoach performer would have produced stats that would have been the seventh best performer for Norf in terms of Supercoach points. So just, to make that clear, because it is a bit hard to follow. I think that was Chang'of Giath.
Oh, yeah, CJ.
He scored, CJ. Oh, sorry, no, it was D'Ambrosio. He scored 65.
Oh, yeah.
Was more than Jai Sinkin 62. And Jai Sinkin was the seventh best performer in Supercoach for North. Well, as I said, Giath was, D'Ambrosio was the sixth worst. So, it just shows how little players got involved in this game for North Melbourne. As I mentioned, the only other players that you would even put in the conversation to having okay games was maybe Cherry and Parker, Caleb Daniel. Oh, sorry, Parker already said. Daniel was who I meant to say. Maybe Jai Sinkins, had a few, but yeah, the rest were pretty much a non-factor.
Yeah.
And that's nearly half the players that went on the field. It was terrible. And, as I said, for Hawthorn, it was mainly on the outside, but they did nominate the clearances as well. Especially, they had two people. Sorry, no, it wasn't. Almost two people in double-digit clearances. Connor Nash had 10. Jai Newcomb had 9.
Yes,
I misread that. But you know what I mean. As I said, it was pretty one-sided. A lot of the stats were. I think it was. Actually, get some of. I didn't actually bother writing most of this down.
Ah, you're good. I mean, it's one of those games where we can pretty much skim over.
Yeah.
Like we know North's issues. We know the Hawthorn's, upsides.
Yeah, it was like 44 clearances to 30, and again, like clearances are meant to be the one area where you can generate a bit. Obviously, that led to 10-6 from stoppage to Hawthorn to 1-3, which is very disappointing. So
yeah,
again,
a bit rough.
The only plus side for this game, and again, it's hard to say because a lot of this did happen in junk time, was the 6-6 from the back half. Like North. It might have been above average for them in terms of like their average score from back half.
Well, we know that despite the fact that we've also been saying that their defense has always been their worst part over the past couple of years. Like we know that they can generate out of their defense when they're able to get their game going, and like we've seen that on multiple occasions now at this point. But it's when they come up against teams, I wouldn't say
generate. They're better than the bottom. Absolute gutter trash they were last year in terms of generating from their defense.
Like they're a team that's developing and growing, and they're always going to encounter games like this where they just get absolutely thrashed. It's no different to Richmond, no different to West Coast. It's just going to happen when you're a young developing side.
It is, but it's just one of those things where I think from here on in, North, and they have a few toughish opponents to finish off the year. I just don't think they can afford to, drop too many 80+ games. I think they've got to like band together and say, you know what, this is the last one. Like, because again, they're just teetering before actually improving to being like a bit too close to last year.
When you look at their run home, it's definitely possible for them to play the rest of the games close. Like, and we know that they can. It'll just be kind of like a remains to be seen kind of thing.
Yeah, I think they have like a couple of top 4 left. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't looked through it. I'm just I'll quickly glance through it now.
No, you're good. I do find it
I'll look at the
interesting though how you like post-bye, North's defense up until this point has been better.
Yeah.
But post-bye, which is literally this game, Hawthorn's offense was elite. And granted, it is against the bottom four side, but they took that off-season time, that buy round time to really like hammer forward how they want to structure offensively. And we know for the fact that like Day and Lewis are still like on the cusp of coming back as well. Because I think they're both on track to come back before finals if they're gonna play it all this season. So
I'm not sure if Lewis gets a game.
I
think he just
with the way they're currently structured in their forward line, it's entirely possible he doesn't break in. Because
honestly, just
Charles
think of
performing.
Gunston as your team punt.
Gunston is winding back the clock each week. Like, they've got Moore performing well. Their Smalls are performing well now.
Like, I also let the record show that I had Gunston in my All-Australian considerations before this 7-goal-1 performance.
You're a man of the future now, are you?
I don't think I had him in my team. I think I had him as like the next best. Although I'll probably put him in over Curtis now. He's dropped off the last few weeks, but as I said. But yeah, you're right. And, as I said, so the 3 games that I want to highlight that are important is next week, obviously, against the Bulldogs.
Yep, that'll be hard.
That's a must. They can't go back-to-back floggings. And they have a few, they have a reasonable amount, but the 2 ones in their ahead is the Cats at Marvel and Adelaide at the MCG. So maybe it's a bit hard to ask, like, maybe they have an 80-point fall.
Well, Geelong at Marvel,
again,
they could definitely surprise. I don't think they would win it, but they could definitely surprise.
Oh, no.
Because Geelong hasn't really been that good at Marvel. Like, granted, they have won a lot more games over the past couple of years at Marvel than not, but they've always looked a bit 50-50 when they go there.
Yeah. But yeah, Adelaide's the sort of team that I could see winning by 100 points.
Yeah, especially on the MCG where they just played. They have a little bit more experience on the G than North do.
Yeah. So that's what I think you're going to expect. But yeah, talking about the Hawks, obviously, it's just, as I said, at times, and this will remain to be seen, again, how good they will be against the better midfields. But you can't fault him for a performance like this. It was very well-rounded. It's very disciplined. And I know it was only up against, North on a bad day. But you know what I mean? It's just, it shows how lethal they can be when you let them do what they want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which, is that double-edged sword of like, it makes teams more likely to want to go out and defend you. And you always have to keep that in mind, because you have to have that plan B. And it's like, well, if they go hard trying to attack us or cut off some of our options, what do we go to? How do we expose them even if they do that? So we'll see what bag of tricks you'll have in the finals. But, this is how you have good seasons. This is how you remain in contention to the top 4. You just go absolutely lethal when a team gives you time and space.
Absolutely.
So that's what they did.
Especially when you're playing against the teams that are bottom 6, where they can be percentage games.
Yeah.
Like, you got to take those advantages when they come.
Yeah.
Because as we saw last season...
And then you just, win enough.
But, as we saw last season, with how close it was percentage-wise across the entire season, percentage matters a lot more than people really think. So when these types of games come up, especially for the top 8 teams, you got to go hard. Because if you're caught lacking and you lose important percentage, it will matter in the long run.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's jump over to our individuals, starting with Jack Constant, of course. He broke his goal-kicking record. I believe it was previously at 6 goals. Now it's at 7. He kicked 7-1 overall from 15 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 86.7% efficiency, 4 contested possessions, 4 marks with all of them inside 50, and 11 score involvements. Connor Nash moved well, as we've just spoken about, finished with 21 touches, 17 of them effective, equating to 81% efficiency, 12 contested possessions, 6 inside 50s, 10 clearances, 2 goal assists, 7 score involvements, 5 tackles, 21 pressure acts, 3 1%ers, and 464 meters gained. And CJ was great in defense as well, collecting 15 disposals, 13 of them effective, equating to 86.7% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 5 score involvements, 6 pressure acts, 4 1%ers, and 3 spoils. Over for North Melbourne, Nikolaki, as we had also mentioned, was a sharpshooter, up forward, kicking 5-3 from 14 touches. 10 of them were effective, equating to 71.4% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 7 marks, with 4 of them inside 50, 9 score involvements, and 9 pressure acts. And Luke Parker tried his heart out, as he often tends to do, unless he's caught getting tagged. He finished with 29 disposals, 20 of them effective, equating to 69% efficiency, 14 contested possessions, 4 marks with 7 inside 50s, 6 clearances, 2 goal assists, 7 score involvements, 7 pressure acts, and 703 meters gained. On the injury front, George Wardlaw came out with concussion, so he will not be playing this week against the Bulldogs. Granted, he has been like very 50-50 in form right now anyway, so he probably could use the extra rest.
I reckon.
Yeah, go on.
Honestly, I'd say it'll take a lot of stones to do this, but bring him back for the VFL. You know what I mean? He's had such a stop-start season. Just be like, you know what? We're going to give you 2 weeks. Get right, get ready. Have a good last few games. But also be like, again, to that midfield group, use that to try and reinvigorate him. It's like, you can do this on your own as well. You got to find ways to do it. If you don't have your best defensive players, other players have to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to see. If I was North, anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree. Over on the MRO front, Jai Simpkin was fined $3,750 for striking Boyd Meek. Tom Barras was fined $2,000 for rough conduct against Paul Curtis. Dylan Moore was fined $1,000 for contact with an umpire. LDU was fined $1,875 for the same thing, contact with an umpire. And Nick Watson was fined $3,125 for engaging in a melee. And Jai Newcomb and Will Dawson were also fined $1,000 each for engaging in said melee.
Yeah.
All right. Now we jump over to Marvel Stadium, where despite, the pretty much top of the table going up against bottom of the table, it was a lot closer than everyone thought it was going to be. And that's Collingwood hosting the West Coast Eagles.
Yeah, and you said you didn't watch this game, and if I told you, this 29-point margin is very flattering to the Magpies. I think it would be a bit...
I did keep an eye on, the little worm that appears as the game progresses. And I just watched it go up and down and up and down up until this fourth quarter. And I was like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, and it's honestly the Magpies, they weren't even that bad. They were legitimately just being a bit mitigated. Obviously the Eagles never really dominated, and obviously they fed it out very late in the last quarter. But it just goes to show, and I think I mentioned that last week, and I think I even joked that you never know, Collingwood might even open the door for you. But you know what I mean? That's why you got to focus on trying to get a game plan that can at least be competitive, because this is just when they did that, they didn't mind the Collingwood pressure. They were still have that trademark pressure. They were defending okay, and the only really thing they lacked was forward threat. It was the only thing that kept them out of this contest. The arm wrestle in the first half was very entertaining, albeit it wasn't quite like a high quality contest. It always felt like Magpies were just fishing, but fishing uncomfortably. You know what I mean? I think they were expecting West Coast to falter a bit more than they actually did. It means that they didn't quite attack as lethally as what you might expect, but I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing, because they were still taking them seriously. And I think if they didn't, West Coast might have actually a little bit more easily got a few more goals. But Collingwood were very different, made scoring harder for the Eagles. The Eagles also missed a few easy set shots, unfortunately. But the movement by the Eagles, the ball movement, it was just good, Yeah. You're watching passages, you're expecting it to break down somewhere like it normally did. The only really place it broke down was inside 50. And that's unfortunately the one area where West Coast have been pretty decent at. So again, it's a bit unlucky that those two things didn't mesh. But Collingwood, they're being Collingwood. They bunkered down defensively. They waited for the mistakes to come. The mistakes only really came in the fourth quarter, and it gave them an ugly win. But they've got a sizable ladder lead. Percentage shouldn't be a factor because they should win a couple of games clear as long as they don't really.
Well, they're
take a
currently
step
2.5
backward.
games clear, so they're in
Yeah.
an extremely comfortable position right now. But this
Yeah.
kind of goes back to what we were just saying in the last game: is that whilst you are first hop on the ladder and you should win majority of the games still coming up, percentage still matters. Like this could have been an absolute bloodbath.
Honestly, I respect what the Eagles did to say. I don't think that was the case. Like, I like when I say those things, it's like when they do falter. Like again, when a bottom 14 is just mucking around with it, you know what I mean? You got to put the foot to the throat.
True.
And again, like North Melbourne. Like if North Melbourne had a respectable amount, you don't expect Hawthorn to rip them by nearly 100 points. But this is like West Coast playing at their best. And again, it wasn't ever really going to take away from Collingwood. Like, the gap was too massive. I've written it in my second notes. 78 games. That was the differential between Collingwood and West Coast experience, which was actually higher than the average game of West Coast, which was 74. So this is a really young squad just trying their best. And if you want to put it in the other perspective, that's a 4-year difference in average age, to put another spin on it.
Yeah, that's true.
And in spite of this, it was just all the youngsters doing what they could. McCarthy, Hull, Brock, Shanahan on debut, they all featured well for the Eaglet. And even for Collingwood, I do actually think that for them, it was actually good to see some of their kids get involved. West, first kick, first goal in the AFL. He joins that club. And Allen and Long are both putting in hard work to keep Collingwood rounded. It's just that veteran talent gap. And I think that'll be one of the biggest things for the Eagles. Because, again, this was another game where I feel like they should have been even a bit more closer. Because, obviously, this game, not all of them, but most of them, played probably above their expected value. Maybe, I'll say the ones that maybe didn't were like Hewitt and Harley Reid. I think they dropped off a bit in the center. But yeah, as I said, it was just some of the veterans. Jaden Hunt came on very late. And obviously I'm not putting that on him, but because he was so out of form, he was like sort of a talent that you probably wouldn't mind starting on field.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Because he's been out of form, starts as a sub, comes on, has very little impact. Jamie Cripps. I mentioned him accidentally last week, and this week he had a bit of a stinker. And yeah, Tim Kelly, he just had an okay game.
Is this maybe the type of game where they would have really liked to have Yo back, and obviously McGovern to not retire, and have Allen in?
I mean, if West Coast could have every player available, then.
But it's like they're their three key. Well, apart from like Duggan and I guess Kelly, like they're their three key veterans at this point. Obviously, Allen's being more on the younger side still, but they're
I had
two of the three of the Premiership
internal joke when Billy Frampton got injured, and I was like, oh no, how is he going to come back? How are Collingwood going to have their defensive matchup against their zero tolls that they have currently playing? Because they are literally just playing BJ Williams as a pretty much full forward. He did take for a contest, but he's pretty much playing full forward as well as Flynn. They're relying on them to actually take the bulk of the directed targets, and the ball goes in there. So obviously that's another reason why they had such bad entry conversion. But yeah, I think really it's just like, I think he would have enjoyed the fact that he would have had a bit more support around him, because he can be very good at finding ways to generate smart offense. And I think that's what they could have used in this game as well. As I said, it's just a game where, because their forward line was struggling, they just needed another avenue to balls.
Yeah.
And, like Tyler Brockman, he bobbed up kick a couple. He was pretty solid. But yeah, apart from that, it just felt like they just needed to polish off a bit of a tap. And normally they're okay at doing that, as I said. But this sort of felt like, it was like the best of Richmond game. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes they play really well, but they just have nothing on the forward line to finish it off. And that was a bit the case here.
Yeah, it's a common trend amongst the bottom 4 teams, I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
And North is slightly a little bit better with it because Larky knows how to lead and knows how to actually take decent marks. And when Zohar's able to get involved, like he gets involved. But yeah, West Coast and Richmond definitely lacking in those areas.
Who's the other bottom 4 team now? I can't even remember.
I think it's either St Kilda or Carlton.
Yeah, St Kilda. So again, St Kilda very much not good at ground level this year. So you can add them to the list, I suppose.
Yeah, they're struggling still in the air for the most part. Like they have decent players, but they just can't take any decent marks, and like unless it's Mitch Owens at this point. And then Higgins has kind of dropped off the past couple of weeks, and they don't really have anyone else. Butler's been the sub, so he hasn't been able to perform consistently. So yeah, there's just not much going on there either.
I think Butler actually started on field this week.
No, he was a sub this week.
Anyway,
pretty sure he was a sub. But anyway, besides the point, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Collingwood because you're right. It was the veteran talent that made it night and day of a difference. Starting with Steele Sidebottom, of course. He was putting on immense pressure in that midfield, finishing with 20 disposals, 15 of them effective, according to 75% efficiency, 8 contested possessions, 2 clearances, a behind, 5 score involvements, 10 tackles, and 25 pressure acts. Scott Pendlebury was very composed in the middle. He kicked a goal from 28 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 75% efficiency as well. 13 contested possessions, 4 marks, 10 inside 50s, 9 clearances, 2 goal assists, 8 score involvements, 6 tackles, 14 pressure acts, 576 metres gained. Captain Darcy Moore was important in defence, collecting 12 disposals, 11 of them effective, equating to 91.7% efficiency. 5 contested possessions, 9 intercepts, 5 marks, 4 of them being intercept marks, 14 1%ers, and 13 spoils. He did his very best to repel absolutely everything. Shout out to debutant Charlie West, of course, as well, finishing with 4 disposals, a goal, first goal, of course, and 17 pressure acts. Over on the Eagles front, Liam Baker cooked this week. He was a chef in the kitchen once more. He finished with 35 touches, 27 of them effective, equating to 77.1% efficiency, 11 contested possessions, 10 intercepts, 4 marks, 3 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 6 tackles, 13 pressure acts, 10 ground ball gets, and 328 metres gained. Recruit Tom McCarthy was elite with movement, collecting 29 disposals, 21 of them effective, equating to 72.4% efficiency, 7 contested possessions, 6 intercepts, 5 marks, 3 inside 50s, 2 score involvements, and 639 metres gained. And then shout out to debutant Job Shanahan, who finished with 8 touches at 100% efficiency, 3 contested possessions, 3 marks, a goal on debut as well, 3 score involvements, and 11 pressure acts.
Yeah, and, sort of, I think what we're also seeing with the Eagles youngsters is like, and I guess it's more prominent in this game where the forward half sort of fell apart, but, it's like not just defensively they're chipping in, they're also generating some of the better ball movement, and, it's like, in this game, and we said, like, Collingwood are one of the better transition team. In terms of just getting the ball to D50 to forward 50, West Coast had a higher rate. D50 to score, West Coast had a higher rate. Defensive half to forward 50, West Coast had a higher rate. Defensive half to score, West Coast. So, in terms of the pure back half, West Coast had legitimately a better game than Collingwood. As I said, it was mainly just the forward half. They kicked 2-5, 17, sort of fell apart from them, but yeah, I said really impressive with some of the generation coming from the kids. And it's good to see them, you know what I mean? It'll be so easy for such a maligned back half to just go into their shells, try to just prevent the worst from happening. But they take it on. And, even just the decision to take Brady Hoff out of the defense. Someone that has spent 2 years there, take him to where it's needed into the middle. And, and just be like, okay, we're going to move the best players into the best positions, but we're also going to have faith in the back 6, even if they are raw. and we're going to set up a system to where they can still generate a bit. Still awfully tough to defend. I still wouldn't want to be in that West Coast Eagles back six, but more and more you can actually see what Mini is trying to do.
Yeah, I
So,
think
I said they do see night and day from those first 6 games, which were pretty abysmal.
I think Mini is apart from the fourth quarter fade out, which you can attribute to experience. Like they ran out of legs. It's happened for a lot of this season. But I think Mini would be very happy with the 3 quarters that they did play. And especially he would be very happy with Clay Hall, who is the round 16 rising star. Sorry, I forgot to refresh the page earlier, so I only just got to it. He finished with 22 touches, 4 tackles, 4 marks, and 3 clearances in that midfield.
Yeah, as I said, very solid. As I said, it was just, one of those things where, the kids are all right, Blazy. The kids are all right.
Indeed, they are. I completely agree. All right. Speaking of kids, we're jumping over to our Sunday matches now, to a match that we all kind of expected this to be the outcome, but I was hoping for a little bit. And I'm very impressed that we still managed to keep fighting in that fourth quarter. Like we didn't give up, we didn't drop our heads, which was very good to see. But yes, it was Richmond hosting the Adelaide Crows at the MCG.
Yeah, well, I'm going to keep my side short because unfortunately, I guess narrative-wise, it's going to be the negative thing. And, it's going to be, well, it's meant to be the start of their forward line, which has been staffed all season of big men. The first game where, you might see a bit of improvement, it just didn't look good. 2-2 in the first half. It showed that they still had some teething issues to get back into the swing of things, and it's not going to get better next week. Lafau, he did his calf in the second, and Lynch had more reports than possession.
Sorry to interject, but I'm so annoyed with the Lafau calf because he was being played in the ruck. Same, like commentators had issues with that with Sam Darcy after coming back from his knee injury. Like it's bad enough he's coming back from an ACL. Like I'm grateful that it's just a calf and not another ACL. But why would you play him in the ruck when he's just done an injury?
I don't know. That's gonna do that. Play Samson Ryan. You know what I mean?
But we had plenty of tall players out there that could have filled in for like Jacob Blight was out there for one. He's had brief experience in the ruck. He could have come in.
What is he? He's over 200, isn't he?
He's like 190 something, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
But like,
it's a big boy.
We had a bunch of players out there that are tall enough to play ruck position if need be, like as Nank is on the bench. Like, but why play Lafau when he's just done a knee? Like, it's fine. I'm grateful. I'm grateful it's just a calf.
He's got a week to rest afterwards. Pretty sure Richmond's got another night game, so.
Oh, true. Bolter will he gets a night off. I don't think he's playing. I don't think he'll play this week against Geelong for that very reason. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like you might as well put him in there because he'll have a week to recover after going against Riley O'Brien, which again, not the most imposing ruckman in the world, but someone you probably don't want to be up against. Is a very big body.
Agreed, 100%. So,
again, going back to the negatives, only 15 shots for the game, 2 of which were inside 30 meters from goal, and they just couldn't generate anything. Adelaide defended really well, but it was also the heights in the wing where they took advantage, as Daniel Curtin dominated as an attacking winger, which sort of offset the relatively even middle game between these two sides. I think that's where Richmond sort of played as okay as it could get in this sort of flogging, 8-6-54 to 18-14, 122. But yeah, it was just not only that, forward half intercept sort of killed them. It set up a lot of one-on-one losses in their defense. I was like, I always look at the one-on-one. Again, not a stat I'm hugely enamored by, but Richmond lost a lot of them, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. The one player in our defense that I think would stand tall in terms of, for the most part, one-on-ones, but like being able to like contend decently at packs was Ben Miller. I watched him for the majority of that game, and I think he had a very solid performance because he has improved like immensely in terms of his one-on-one game and being able to contend well in marking contests.
Yeah, there was one that did fairly well. I just, for the sake of it, I'll look it up for you. But again, I don't actually think it was Ben Miller, but you got to remember, one-on-one contests are very specific. As soon as like a player even thinks about entering, it turns into a contested pack and doesn't get recorded. So, honestly,
by eyes, I think it was Miller,
I think
but by stats, it could have been someone else.
yeah, like as I said, defending one-on-one is, I reckon, more how much you defend a lead. So yeah, Ben Miller, 5 contested one-on-ones, lost 4. In
Little
terms
rough.
of the ones that did well. Yeah, I know. Butts did really well. He obviously, for the other team, 6 for nothing. So he did.
I mean, he
well,
was up against Lynch and got the better of him by far. So
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there was a few that just went 50-50. Blight and Tom Brown split it even. Noah Bolter did as well. So, and there was a few that got a clean sheet, but they were only like...
yeah,
again, not a stat I'm huge on, but I get what you mean, though. It's like, as I said, I think that just comes with like a high turnover thing. You know what I mean? Forwards get a bit of separation. That's when you get the one-on-one contest, because obviously guys normally kick to packs. So that's why I mentioned that specifically. Not that I think, as I said, because I'm with you. I think Miller is a pretty solid defender, and obviously I can't say for this game because I've got no idea. But yeah, sometimes
it's just one of those games. It's no different to kind of Hawthorn North.
But you do have some players you're a bit more optimistic.
I do.
Especially in the individual reports. So I'll let you go to them.
Indeed, I do. But I'm going to start with Adelaide, of course, because they were the victors. With big man Riley Thorpe, of course. He kicked truly. He also played a little bit in the ruck. He got 6 hit-outs with one of them to advantage. But he also kicked 5-2 from 16 disposals, 10 contested possessions, 6 marks with all of them inside 50, 2 goal assists and 12 score involvements. Dan Curtin had a monster game. We were talking about this on the Discord. He was phenomenal on field. He kicked 2 goals from 26 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 80.8% efficiency, 9 contested possessions, 8 intercepts, 8 marks, with 4 of them being intercept marks, 7 inside 50s, 3 clearances, 3 goal assists, 11 score involvements, 5 tackles, 12 pressure acts, 495 meters gained, possibly a couple of Brownlow votes to go with that as well. And then Captain Jordan Dawson was a lead around the ground as well, finishing with 26 disposals, 11 contested possessions, 5 marks, 8 inside 50s, 7 clearances, 2 goal assists, 12 score involvements, 6... Oh, sorry. Why did I write that twice? I think it's 12 score involvements, 6 tackles, 17 pressure acts, 527 meters gained. Yeah. I think that's what it actually is. I don't know.
Probably tackles then.
And then on the Richmond side of things, Sam Banks was absolutely elite with ball movement, one of his best games for us this week. He kicked a goal from 25 touches, 21 of them effective, equating to 84% efficiency, 4 marks, 3 inside 50s, 4 score involvements, 4 tackles, 17 pressure acts, and 822 meters gained. And the other player who debuted last week was Jasper Olga. He looked very composed, went up forward. He kicked 2 goals, including one from a miracle boundary. I say miracle boundary. It was actually in front of goal. He accidentally bashed into the goalpost completely by accident. He was pushed by another player, fell to the ground, and managed to just quickly kick it inside. Got the goal. That was his first goal as well, and then he followed it up with a second, just to make it a little bit more special. He did that from 11 disposals, 8 of them effective, equating to 72.7% efficiency, 5 contested possessions, 4 marks, 3 inside 50s, and 4 score involvements. As we had mentioned, McKelty Lafau with the calf injury. Hopefully it's not out for too long. I'll take a look at the injury list once that is updated. I'm praying it's only a couple of weeks. I am begging and praying. But on the MRO front, there is quite a few. So I will touch on that now. Lynch, obviously, he's being sent directly to the tribunal for that strike on Jordan Butts. So we will probably update that once we know officially how long he's going to be out for. I would assume at least 4 weeks, considering how intentional it was and how severe it was. Though surprisingly,
honestly,
Butts didn't come out of that with a concussion, which is good.
No. I mean, only because it was such a crap swing.
True.
You know what I mean? But Yeah, I said he's lucky because I was thinking 5 weeks overall because I was even thinking I know, you know, it was very low impact, but when he raked, was it when he raked his studs over, was it Curtin's face?
I don't remember
Was
this
that?
happening, to be honest, but it might have been
Oh, he
Curtin.
just, it's one of those things where he like stepped on accidentally someone's face with the studs. Um, but you know what I mean? He's just like went forward for no reason, rubbed his boot on the face, and then went backwards.
Ah, okay.
I thought it was like iffy enough to be like, "Oh, you can get a week for that. Other players have, but
That's true.
yeah, as I said, gets off for that. But yeah, that will be form in. I would have
Yeah,
to say.
agreed. There are other. He has been fined for two other things. So he was also fined for
Mm.
engaging in a melee or wrestle. That is $1,875. He was also fined $1,000 for striking Jordan Butts in the first place. Um, Jordan Butts was fined $1,000 for engaging in a melee as well, and then Jacob Hopper was fined $1,500 for tripping Dan Curtin. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, there isn't really much more
look,
I really want to say on that game. There were a couple of other players that I thought
yeah,
played well. Blight played well. Hugo is always a fun player to watch. I think Tom Brown had a decent game. Prestia had
mm.
another decent game through that midfield. So there's still a couple of good bright spots, but Seth Campbell stepped up in the second half. I thought he had a decent second half. But
Mm.
yeah, Jonty Fowl also had a really good second half. But otherwise, yeah, it's just one of those games you kind of expect.
Yeah. And it's like so much is going to be talked about Lynch, but I think the main thing too is like Richmond have backed him in pretty much all season this
Well,
year.
we've had no
Like he hasn't
choice
had a great
really
year.
because our tools are too
I know
raw
you've
and
had
need
no
that
choice,
experience.
but you know what I mean? It's like they've done their best to sort of defend him. But yeah, as I said, just to, and he's meant to be a leader, just to lose that composure, I think it's if it isn't one of the toughest nights of his career post match, then you know what I mean. He probably doesn't have the fortitude to be in that leadership position anyway. So,
Yeah,
um, you know what I mean. I know he's not probably in the leadership group, but as the only experienced forward there, that's when you look at it as a coach and it's like, is it worth putting him on for another year? You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting
yeah,
to
it's
see.
it's a tough call, but we need someone with experience up there whilst there are
Oh,
other tall forwards.
yeah,
Because as we've talked about in the past, like tall players are the hardest ones, or the ones that take the longest to
yeah,
develop. So we just need someone with experience to be just up forward, able to have that,
yeah,
able to just be there as we try and get
yeah.
games into Foul, into Harry Armstrong when he comes back from injury,
Mhm.
um, into
But then on the flip
the
side,
one that I'm blanking at, Liam Fawcett,
yeah, Fawcett, yeah.
and Seth Campbell, of course.
Hmm. It's like, yeah, but then you're gonna like, well, it's like, do Richmond look at like, there's been a lot of good pickups in, from delisted forwards, forwards that may not have had, quite the impact at some clubs for positions. So I was like, well, do you roll the dice on one of them instead
We
of
tried that, hasn't worked
extending
out.
Lynch? Yeah, it is true.
I I don't
What's
I
his name? Kaczynski.
Yeah, I don't really want another Kaczynski, I'll be honest. Like, to be fair, that's
Yeah,
Hawthorn's payback for us giving them Ty Vickery back in the day.
yeah, I guess.
Um,
Yeah. But anyway, it's just something to think about. But overall, you just gotta forget about this
yeah, this
game
is
and
like
who the
this is
dud
like an
is.
end of season kind of conversation.
Yeah. Anyway,
All right,
it
let's
was a
jump
fun
over
match.
to our last game of the round over in the West at Optus Stadium. Fremantle hosts St Kilda, and this was another close game that people were 50-50 expecting, but also we were
Hmm.
expecting Freo to maybe go a little bit higher in terms of what they actually scored.
Yeah, I think that was it. And as I said, we say that the Saints love inflicting pain on Freo at random times. Ross went. I mean, maybe it's a bit harsh to say all out with the negative tactics early. But they did enough to mitigate Freo's movement, and especially in the centre bounces and stoppages. St Kilda absolutely dominated, and that was mainly Marshall, Garcia, McRae, and Hunter Clark. They all had clearances aplenty, which just prevented Freo from getting anything going. On the outside, Hull and at times Henry and Winhager were giving them trouble as O'Driscoll struggled, which meant that the only outside threat was Murphy Reid when he came up a bit higher onto the ground. And this caused this game to be a defensive slug because the Saints were having easier shots but struggling to convert with less forward threats. And Freo were just not getting good looks inside. We've mentioned that they've sort of gone from a more outside game to a more inside game over the last few weeks during this win streak. And this was sort of where that sort of got shut down. I will say that during this time when St Kilda were dominating, I think Cox and Clark did really good jobs to keep Freo's backline stable, kept it all under control, kept them in it, and it just kept them ticking. But, you know, as I said, probably with an equally opportunistic Saints attack. But in the last quarter, it was their forward line / ruck tolls that would seize the moments with Sean Darcy, I was about to say Daniel Jackson, Luke Jackson, and Josh Tracy, all scoring important goals from solid forward 50 marks, and got past the fist of the day of Alex Torrey, who was playing his life out so that we'll try and keep Tracy touches limited. So, as I said, the Saints were really trying in defense, and the fact that they could keep the Freo tolls out of it until very late was a big tick. But they just got the wood over them. It ended up finishing 11-59, 15-69.
Yes.
And yeah, as I said, it was a tough one for the Saints. They did a lot right. You know, I think, you know, even though it wasn't pretty, the fact that they made this game a bit of a dredge was heavily. And, you know, unless you're watching the game, you won't really appreciate how big of an operation that 5 minutes was of forward line dominance, because it did feel like Taru just had everything back there. I would say it's the best game for his career.
He's only played like 3 games.
Yeah, I know, but this was, what I meant was I would be surprised if this wasn't his best game of his first year.
I think this is a really good benchmark for like the type of player that St Kilda want to develop him into, and like the type of player. I think it's the type of player that he was coming out of like the draft anyway. Like he was like touted as like one of the top defenders, but the fact that he was able to put on such a monster performance, whilst Wilkie pretty much was the only one able to really contend with the other talls, is crazy. And I don't mention him in my individuals, but this is a kid that St Kilda need to keep for the future, 100%.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, again, in terms of defensive players that, you know, playing above expected, you know, Wilkie obviously absolutely can't. Did struggle a bit with Tracy, but I don't think that's like his preferred matchup. But is a matchup he sort of had to play. Wilkie likes getting around, but I just don't think they have the matchup to play him loose. So their sacrifice is a bit of his game. They let Taru get the big job on Jai Amos. He's really struggling at the moment. Absolutely fantastic. And the best thing is, because he was so dominant on Amos, he was allowed to play loose. And that was the big win for them. And then Caminiti, you know, Patrick Voss, I know he's been a bit up and down, but he's normally been able to at least get a goal a game. And Caminiti does a really solid job on it. So, big ticks. Obviously, as I said, Josh Tracy, a couple early and a lot of influence in that last quarter. But yeah, as I said, I still think, you know, for St Kilda, I guess it was sort of like the West Coast game. You know, the midfield did really good jobs. Their backline was surprisingly solid. Did generate a bit, but I think where it was obviously their forward half connection. Again, just not generating enough goals from the ground. Did score a bit from stoppage. Again, that's an area where Freo tend to struggle. But yeah, like still scored, you know, got enough scoring shots from the forward half with 4-9, but none of them, like, they weren't really thrown in, unfortunately. And, it, you know, as I said, a bit better conversion they should probably win this game, but it's one that you're like, well, they just did the right thing against a team. They just didn't execute.
Yeah,
And, it's a bit of a pain.
I think besides the St Kilda's forward half, I think Ross would be very happy with the way the midfield and the backline performed. They handled most of what was thrown at them really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what I mean? It's like, a few, again, it's like a few trading places or some things. And it's like, I did like the fact, because I mentioned that this is a very defensive game, but then you get a player like Rowan Marshall, and it's like, yeah, sure, Darcy and Jackson did some offensive things, but so did Marshall. It's probably one of his best games of the season. He's been very up and down.
Agreed.
And again, it's like Max Hall on the wing, again, very fringe player, I guess. I think he's only been on the list here. Picked up very late in the draft, I think.
Yeah, he's either first or second year player, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, as I said, he was able to, match up on O'Driscoll, keep him quiet for the first 3 quarters. He did get into it, but yeah, I said the damage was done as Freo just, it was a game where they conceded that they had to go one. Once they did, they started normalizing. They still found it a bit hard. As I said, Freo had to play in St Kilda's game style, but they were solid enough to finish this. I guess that brings me to my final point that I have for this, and it's like they've won 6 in a row, and it's a mix of teams. Giants and Sun being the good teams of those 6. With the Roos, Ports, Dons, and Saints arguably being
Port
associated.
Port at the time, technically. Port are looking somewhat better now, but
somewhat better now. But yeah, as I said, they were pretty rabble when they played Freo. So you know what I mean. They for a 6 win in a row team, they have looked a bit disconnected. So it's going to be very interesting how the rest of the year plays out for them. Because again, despite the 6 wins in a row, it's still very iffy if Freo make final. I think they have it in them. I think I actually have Freo out the end. It'll be a toss-up between Freo and...
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really, really tight finish going into the run home.
Yeah. But, as I said, the way that Freo have changed up, they've gone from being very slow from the back half. And they, but they were really good at back half ball movement. But they've sort of abandoned their outside game. They've dropped off a lot in back half score. So sort of the question is like, what happens when they face the other forward half teams going well? Because obviously the Giants, not that profile. The Suns, it was wet when that was playing. And it's like, they score well from stoppages. But as I said, it was only really in center clearances. And you know what I mean? Their score from stoppage against is pretty mediocre. They have the worst mark inside 50 rate in the league, despite running 3 tolls. And they have mediocre forward 50 ground, despite a healthy amount of inside 50s. So my guess is like, Freo, they're not, I don't want to say be contrarian. It's like, 6 wins in a row, but Freo are still, because they're still obviously good. This is where, you got to temper things if you're a Fremantle fans, and you just you want to see, Freo just play consistent football, and it's like, you want to see the approach for the last 6. Not last 6 games. It might be 6. Is 6 or 7? Anyway,
what are we at? Round 16?
Yeah. You just want to see those 7 games be consistent.
7 games.
You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. And it's like, they've got a bit more out of their forward half. Obviously, their back half movement's been okay, but you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you just want to see them at least bring a contest in their back half. They might not win over them. They don't need to, but against the good forward half teams, I think they got Brisbane coming up. I think there's another one, maybe Adelaide they've got to face, but yeah, you want them to do well against one of those teams, and then you're confident.
Yeah.
If they don't, though, it becomes a bit iffy, despite the 6 wins in a row.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because I was gonna ask you, do the 6, 7, whatever wins in a row, do they make them the real deal? But it's not all the story, because They still have
No.
7 more games to go. Up against some of them up against pretty tough opponents, and
Yeah.
the entire like bottom half of the top 8 is still completely in flux. Like it could change like in any moment, really.
Yeah. And it's like, we also forget, Freo were pretty bad in the first half of the year. They had a couple of lucky wins. They dropped a few games that they probably shouldn't have. The first of which being St Kilda um, in that contest. But you
It's
know what I
true.
mean? It's like, the ones that are coming up that for recently is the Hawthorn game and the Collingwood. Um, Obviously, they need to beat the Hawthorn game to be considered a real deal,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just have to be respectable against Collingwood. If they do that and do solidly against Brisbane, then you're like, well, maybe they don't win all those games, but they might be threatened finals. But I just think, yeah, they've got to show a tiny bit more than what they've been showing this week's. There's still areas of improvement, but winning's winning.
Yeah.
It's good, you know. So,
And as much as I'm sure they would
yeah,
love the percentage, getting
yeah,
getting the 4 points right now is what's mostly needed for them.
yeah, exactly. And it's just about not dropping those games to make finals. But yeah, as I said, the way I see it now, I think finals is the aim. But I just don't see them winning from like a 7th or 8th position. I think that's where they're most likely going to go.
Well, as long as they make finals, that is an improvement upon last year because they missed
Yeah,
out purely on percentage.
yeah, exactly.
Um, let's jump over to our individuals now, starting with Luke Jackson. He was very important around the ground, not only taking the ceiling mark of the game on the siren and also kicked a goal from said mark to make the margin from 6 points to 12 as the final margin. He also got 16 hitouts, 2 of them to advantage, and kicked 2-1 from 15 disposals, 11 of them effective, equating to 73.3% efficiency, 11 test possessions, 4 marks, all of them inside 50, 3 inside 50, 7 score involvements, 8 tackles, and 17 pressure acts. Jordan Clark put on another dominant showing, kicking a goal from 31 touches, 24 of them effective, equating to 77.4% efficiency, 13 contested possessions, 14 intercepts, 10 marks, with 6 of them being intercept marks, 6 score involvements, 18 pressure acts, 517 meters gained. Josh Tracy was important in the second half. He kicked 3-1 from 8 disposals, 4 marks, with 3 of them being inside 50, 6 score involvements, 3 1%, and 3 spoils. On the St Kilda side, Rowan Marshall, despite being beaten in the ruck, competed well around the ground. He got 26 hitouts, 9 of them to advantage, and kicked 1-1, including the miracle goal of the year contender from the ruck contest, completely off the boot, didn't touch the hands. That was all from 22 touches, 13 contested possessions, 4 intercepts, 4 marks, 3 inside 50s, 10 clearances, 10 score involvements, 6 tackles, 16 pressure acts, 5 1%ers, 3 spoils, and 343 meters gained. And then Jack Steele pressured well in that middle, finishing with 22 disposals, 11 contested possessions, 4 clearances, 6 score involvements, 9 tackles, and 24 pressure acts. On the injury front, Nat Fife was an unused sub as he had calf awareness at halftime. So even if there were injuries on field, he wouldn't be able to play, so they would have had no one to put in. It's a little funny and a little embarrassing, but good thing they managed to make it through. And then on the MRO front, Josh Tracy was fined $1,875 for engaging in a melee. I don't know who with, because no one else was fined. But there you go.
I vaguely remember. I think it was. Oh, I don't know. I think it was weird. I think it was like a Mason Wood actually.
Mason Wood. Sorry.
Yeah, but as I said, it's like one of those things where, as I said, weren't too many big performers for Freo, but just sort of got that job done. But yeah, as I said, also the funny thing about Nat 5 calf awareness is that people were pushing him to play full games. And I'm like, you know what?
He doesn't have the body for it anymore. He'd have to pull. There's a player at the moment who only plays like half a game, and then is the one that's subbed out. I can't remember who it is. It's a veteran. I don't know.
It used to be like Gunston, Bruce.
Yeah, the Gunston Bruce super sub.
Even Swallow last year. I know he's gone into like.
There's one this year, and I just can't remember who it is. But like that's the situation Nat Fife would be in if he was to start it in a start at the start of a game rather than being the sub. I think he's in a situation where he has to be similar to Gunston or Bruce, where they have to be the super sub and only come in when
Yeah.
required. Which is unfortunate
It
because
just like
he's a man of many talents, but he's at that age and his body's in that situation where he just can't outrun games anymore.
And the disappointing thing too is they needed something different at centre back. They were getting absolutely smashed. And I know that Darcy lifted up, and you know what I mean. Like they managed to resolve it, but I definitely think they needed a different mix-up because they just weren't getting the done.
Yeah, I think Brayshaw was getting tagged, and that definitely didn't help him. Because Brayshaw had a fairly quieter game compared to normal. Sarong stepped up.
Like normally this is a game where you would expect. Yeah, like in fact, I was completely opposite of what I thought prediction. Like Windhager didn't actually attack at all. He was playing outside, defensively liable. I think Steele was running with Brayshaw, and I think just I think he just like tuned his game to be a bit more defensive.
There's a fair chance.
Yeah, as I said, Sarong. Yeah, he just didn't really. He had a bit of impact. Just not racking up possessions. I'd say Sarong was probably the better game, but I wouldn't say it's like near one of his better performances.
Yeah,
the bulk of the work was definitely done by the Tolls late and Jordan Clark off halfback, and Brennan Cox, as I mentioned before.
Yes, absolutely. All right, let's jump over to our ladder, and it honestly, not much really has changed, at least for the top two. Collingwood and Brisbane are still sitting firmly in first and second position. Collingwood now 2.5 games in front on 52 points. Brisbane on 42. Look, we've seen a little bit of their run home. Fair chance they will keep that top position for the rest of the season. Obviously, miracles can happen, but I think it's a somewhat safe bet. I'd say about 75% at the moment. But once we get a little bit closer, I think that'll be a more guaranteed percentage. Going to
did you say 75 for first or top four?
First.
Okay, I was gonna say.
No, for top four, it's 100%. Like they're not dropping out of top four.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, even mathematically, it's pretty hard.
Mathematically, it's pretty hard. Brisbane on 42 points. Coming in third is the Crows on percentage at 40, with Geelong dropping to fourth. Also on 40 points, of course, with the difference between 12% of percentage. Hawthorn and Fremantle come in at 5th and 6th, also on 40, and they're much lower in percentage. Western Bulldogs jump up to 7th on 36 points. 36 points, 131 percentage. The Gold Coast Suns jumping back into the top 8 after falling out last week. Also 136 points at 120 percentage. The GWS Giants, therefore, dropping to 9th, but also on 36 points on 107 percentage. Like we said, this is still extremely close, like it was last year. Anything could happen in these last 7 weeks. In 10th position is Port Adelaide on 28 points. They're the only ones on 28 points. They could still very much cause an upset in this 7th, 8th, 9th positioning. But that also obviously remains to be seen because it depends on other teams as well.
Pretty tough run home.
Yeah. In 11th is Carlton at 24. 24 points. The Sydney Swans at 12th, also on 24 points. Essendon at 13th, also on 24 points. Melbourne and St Kilda, 14th and 15th respectively, on 20 points. North Melbourne at 16th on 18. Richmond 17th on 12 points. And the West Coast Eagles still with their sole win at 18th. Yet, they don't have the worst percentage in the league because that belongs to Richmond by 0.4.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I do think Richmond... this is where I expected Richmond to do pretty bad. Just that run home. Playing a lot of the kids.
Young blood. A couple of tough games still. Games that we definitely aren't expected to win, but probably can contend in some degree. But without Lynch, it's going to make it even harder. Without Lafau, it's going to make it even harder. So it's definitely a wait and see as to what our young Tolls will produce. Anyway, let's jump over to our round ahead. I don't know where I was going with that segue, to be honest. I was trying to think of...
Well, I was about to say headway, and it's like talking about uphill battles. This could be another round where favourites are going to dominate. It's almost exactly the top half of the ladder versus the bottom half.
It really is. And honestly, there's maybe one or two where the games could be a potential coin flip. But we're going to start off with a Thursday night clash at Marvel Stadium. It's North Melbourne hosting the Bulldogs.
Yeah, for North, there's one simple thing. Don't be as dismal in your midfield. You let the dogs run all over you, or you open up the stuff. This is where we just want to see resistance.
You don't want the Dogs to do to you what they did to the Bombers.
Yeah, pretty much. And you know what I mean? It's like, I think they've played this year and it wasn't as bad. Yeah, it was early on. The Bulldogs had a few injuries.
Yeah, that's right.
So you know what? It's like, you try and build off that. I know, obviously, it's a different Bulldogs side now, but as I said, you got to fish out for minor wins. You got to be like, hey, we're not going to let ourselves get worse. We're going to show that we're still improving. And obviously, I don't think that will translate into a win, or even as close as the 16 points they got in round one.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said, it's all about respect this game. As for the Bulldogs, again, they just want to connect up. They want to get some good back half movement. That's where they can, get a bit over North Melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if their midfield dies down, they're just going to obliterate them. And it's like Sam Darcy, as I said, if he gets Toby Pink on a bad day, he might come back into the Coleman race. He's trying his hardest.
He really is. It's too bad that Norton took a couple of his goals from last week. Otherwise, he would have had more of a shot.
To be fair, I think that was credit to I forgot who was on him. Pelican. He did actually play better.
That's true.
That second half, but
yeah, definitely both gone Bulldogs on that one. Jumping over to Friday night, where we're back with a double clash. First of all, it's Carlton hosting Collingwood at the MCG. No one really expects Carlton to show up, so we expect another Collingwood bloodbath. But by how much is the question?
You say that. Historically, these two teams have produced pretty close contests.
Yeah, but it's Carlton.
Yeah, there was only 17 the first time around. I don't think Collingwood had quite got their offense set up like they have. And even then, I wouldn't say it's as lethal, but I think they were feeling out, and now they've gotten a bit more consistent. So I think for Collingwood, yeah, as I said, it's fishing for those more ruthless performance. As I said, I wasn't going to criticize them for the West Coast, but Carlton are just, have a team for the picking sort of vibe against them. I think Collingwood will respect them if Carlton show up. And I think that's the best possible outcome for them. But yeah, as I said, in terms of that, if you're not going to put any pressure on the Collingwood's midfield, they're just going to, get those handball chains going, get to the forward line fairly easily. In terms of the other way, I definitely think that Wiedering's been a bit off and on. So, if they just get the ball to ground, get players like Elliott, Hill involved, it's not going to be too much of a contest. But again, for Carlton, it's like West Coast. It's I don't think they have much avenues to win, but if they can get Collingwood to respect you, and they will respect teams, then, it might get a bit of a grudge matchup. Maybe put a bit of excitement on this Friday night clash against two bitter rivals.
Yeah, it could be interesting. Carlton might have to do it without Silvani, because apparently he is in doubt to play. So that's not going to help them on their defensive setups, especially if Wiedering isn't having a good performance over the past couple of weeks. But yeah, for the time being, Collingwood clear favourites. Hopefully Carlton show up, but we can only hope and pray that it becomes an interesting game. Jumping over to the West, where the Eagles will host the Giants out at Optus.
Well, it's sort of opposite from this last two games, where we had two teams that put it close last time, but you might expect the gap to widen. West Coast got absolutely blown out by GWS. The first matchup they had this year. GWS, I think, improved their marks inside 50 rate by about 10% after they faced him in round 3. So I think the Eagles' defense has legitimately gotten better. They're playing players in better positions. So what I want to see, I don't know if they'll keep points or anything, but if they can keep the marks inside 50 under like 20, or maybe even like 15 on a really good day, I think that would be like something to aim for. I don't think they're going to be defensively dominant. I don't think they're going to be offensively potent.
Mm-hmm.
Although GWS's defense is a bit off this year. I know obviously Sam Taylor and Buckley are still like a really good core.
Well, Sam Taylor's currently
they
out,
haven't been.
so that doesn't help them at all.
Taylor's out still, isn't he?
Yeah, he's still out. He's out he did a foot injury, I think. Foot, calf, something like that. He's out for a while.
What was a short-term injury?
No, it's 6 weeks.
All right. Yeah. Well, anyway.
So, not that I think
it. I
don't know if it's going to matter too much in this one, but
it won't matter. But yeah, as I said, in terms of that, because the Eagles work like dismal. Like they were pretty poor. I think 81 points was flattering to the Eagles. I remember that match quite vividly. But you know what I mean? It's like Giants, not the greatest midfield. Try and get something going there. Your centre bounce core. They didn't at that time. They had no idea. They were like rotating players. You just want to prove that setup that they've spent 7 rounds of being pretty mediocre has paid off, and it's actually improved them as a side. So important for them to get somewhat close. I think it's still like in the realms of going to be at like 60 points plus. But you would hope that they sort of go with them certification and, maybe keep them just around 100 points.
I'd like to hope that Eagles have a pretty solid fight back, fairly solid game against the Giants offense. And I would love to see this be close, honestly. It really will show like how they've been developing. In terms of the Giants, so this is the need to win game. If they want to play finals, they need to put their stamp on this game. Whether it's going to be a blowout or not, I think that's debatable. They definitely need the percentage.
Yeah.
But the 4 points alone will at least be enough, I think.
Yeah, as I said, you wouldn't think West Coast is going to cause them too upsets, especially when you could just consider forward line to back off matchups. But, as I said, I do think the Eagles, I don't know, I believe that they've got a bit more fight in them than just, because on matchup, this is a pretty bad head-to-head.
Especially in the midfield, it's not the greatest at all.
Well, inside midfield, I think it's good. Outside, it's where it's hard. GWS, despite some of their defensive woes, can restrict ball movement if they want to. So
very, very true. All right, let's jump over to our Saturday games now, starting at Marvel Stadium, where the Bombers will host the Suns.
Well, they were meant to take the bye round, recover, come back a bit fresh. They obviously had a step back. For those who aren't in the know, they had 3 injury, I think 2 injury extensions and 1 fresh injury. I think it was Colt Langford.
I haven't checked this, but I believe that's true, but I need to double check that.
Anyway, yeah. But Essendon have shown a bit of fight, despite whatever team they're putting out in the park. Again, it spiraled out the last couple of games, obviously getting quite comprehensively beaten by mainly Geelong, sort of Fremantle.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, it's one of those ones where I wouldn't be surprised if the margin wasn't all that bad. I do think it will be hard for Essendon to keep Gold Coast under 100 points. But, yeah, it's one of those ones where I do believe that Essendon are a team that can be respectable.
Yeah, I think so. I think... How long ago did the Suns last play Marvel? Like, has it been since the Richmond game, or have they played since then? I can't remember.
Don't know.
I think they've played it since, but like they haven't really always looked great at Marvel, just in general. But most of the games that they've played, they have been close or they've lost. And I think the Bombers, despite their injuries, can cause a couple of surprises, a couple of headaches.
Yeah.
But I think the Suns, just purely based on Essendon's injuries, should overcome them and fairly, I won't say a fairly comprehensive win, but they should take away the 4 points.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, heading down the highway now, down to Geelong, where the Cats will host the Tigers. We will be going in without Lafau, without Lynch, and without Bolter. Purely because of what time the game starts, we'll go in without Bolter, which is annoying, but is what it is. It's still until I think another 2 or 3 weeks until that's finished. But yeah, this would have been a great game for him to actually be in the side. So we're gonna struggle to contend with Neil and with Cameron. Obviously, I see Geelong winning this by a very clear margin.
Yeah.
I just
and they
want
have
to.
been roofed.
I just
Like,
want
they
to
are
see something like
Geelong.
contend.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to see some kind
Yeah.
of decent contention, really.
Yeah.
Competitiveness.
I mean, this is going to be. I'll say this is probably the biggest margin of the games. Yeah, it's just like Geelong and Adelaide are the two teams that just tear anyone apart. Gold Coast a bit, but they're the real percentage rackers against the bottom.
Oh yeah,
4.
absolutely.
And yeah, as I said, it's just the variation of attack that Geelong's able to put up. As I said, it did stuff up against Brisbane. They got a lot of shots, but Brisbane had enough defensive accountability to at least limit Geelong's scoring potential.
Yes.
But yeah, I can't see that happening. The best outcome is, again, just work through the midfield. Try and get attack when you can. It was, at least shots on goal. Because, Richmond's not very accurate. They struggle, but you know what I mean? If you can get like 45, maybe 20 shots on goal, maybe all right.
It'd be nice. Again, I'd just like to see some competitiveness, that's all. Because I know this is going to be... I know Geelong want to turn this into a bloodbath, just to make out that percentage that they've lost in some of the closer games. So, yeah, it's not really much more to say on that one. So we'll jump over now to the Gabba, where Brisbane will host Port Adelaide.
It's not been a happy hunting ground for Port in recent times. And honestly, probably not the best team to match up. I don't think we've won against Brisbane all that often. Yeah, again, this is one where I just hope that Port prove, like, this will be the barometer whether Port's actually improved post-bye. And I know, we'll poor against Sydney. There were bits and pieces, but if we can, I guess, if we go into this saying, okay, Brisbane feast off back half turnovers, they're one of the best back half scoring teams. It's a bit opposite to some of their other scoring profiles when they have been top, even a bit premiership year, where they were clearly by far and away the best forward half team. Scored a bit much more off the back half, especially off turnovers. So if Port can be like, okay, we're not going to let the Lions by feasting on us in our back half, because the Lions will get plenty of entries.
Yeah.
That's the main thing I want to see. Obviously, I don't think Port will win. But I do think they have the capability of keeping this, between 20 and 30 points. And be a lot better than the last few times. Even if they are technically a worse team than the last few times they've faced up against Brisbane.
Yeah, I completely agree. My interesting matchup will be who takes Morris, because Morris has been their spearhead up forward for the Lions past couple of weeks.
Yeah.
You expecting
Asava.
You expecting Asava to 100% have the job on him?
Yeah, I mean, Morris, pure leading forward, so if Aaliyah went on him, Aaliyah intercepts, and Asava is just really good at getting the ground. He's very strong.
He is. He's big. He is also big-bodied. Like, he is a big
so
dude.
that's where you want to... Because I know Logan's got very strong hands. He's a good leader. So, as I said, I think he can actually limit the amount of damage he does. So, on the flip side, you probably want to see, maybe a Hipwood try and get a bit involved offensively. But yeah, as I said, it's Yeah, they're still going to get attacked from other areas, especially that midfield. That's something where Brisbane can normally just generate enough, especially on the outside.
Oh yeah.
Port can sometimes generate offensively, not so much defensively from their outside. Jace isn't as much as a two-way player as I probably would like. And Richards is obviously an attacking. Yeah, it's just hard to see Port limiting the amount of options, but I think they can defend and keep up with it on a good day.
Yeah, that's completely reasonable. All right, jumping back over to Marvel Stadium now, where St Kilda hosts the Hawks, and after what we've seen from St Kilda up against Freo, um,
Yeah.
I think they could definitely make it hard for Hawthorn to have a convincing win here.
And this is one of the ones that's weird. It's the thing. 7 times out of 10, Hawthorn gets the job done. But when things click for St Kilda, when they know, and they will nullify some of like Hawks' midfield and outside movement, where they can be really lethal. I think Saints still have the capability of reining that back in. And that's where it gets interesting, because it's like, well, Hawthorn, I mean, Charles been really good, but their back three has been good enough to where you think that they might have a bit of a tough time just getting forward goals. Obviously, it was just one really good patch by Fremantle getting their toes in the game. And you know what? It just makes the Hawks anemic. And I can't remember what I've done for my thing as the round. I'm putting the Hawks under 70 points.
You think it's going to be close? Oh, well, not necessarily close, but like a low scoring affair.
Close, but I think Hawthorn will. Yeah, I think this will be a low scoring. I think Hawthorn will score under 70 points. It's just got that vibe. I know that would be less than man, but there's just something about it. Plus, I got no idea what else I'm going to say for it. I've realized I've gotten like 7 games in,
and you just
I've got more games, and I still can't figure out where.
No, that's very fair. Well, you look at it on paper, like Wilkie will probably have to match up on Troll. Toru will probably take Gunston, I would assume. And then maybe you probably maybe put Caminiti on more.
Caminiti, yeah, Gunston.
Oh yeah, Caminiti, Gunston.
I think Toru on more.
Yeah, that's much better.
Maybe.
Then it'll just be if they're able to nullify, which against Freo's Trolls for the most part, they did a fairly decent job. They will be able to hold that well. It'll just be about shutting down Hawks smalls, especially with Ginnivan and Watson having such renewed performances. Like just slightly before the bye.
But obviously the thing that's preventing me to actually legitimately give St Kilda the chance, and this is like the dice roll, it's how is the ground level game for St Kilda going to go? Are they going to get what's his name? Owens and what's his face involved?
Sharman?
What's the other one? Sharman. Yeah. Are they going to get that? Are they going to have any ground level presence? Is Higgins going to fight back a bit? If 2 of those things click, then maybe St Kilda have a legitimate chance. If not, Hawthorn's just going to get a boringly safe, but maybe low scoring win.
Yeah, I do actually kind of agree with you that it could very much be low scoring. I don't know if it's going to be like 70 points low scoring. But I think St Kilda will definitely make it hard for them if they're able to click in terms of that defensive pressure. Jumping over to our Sunday games now, we will head up to the SCG where Sydney hosts Fremantle. And honestly, both of these games on Sunday could be the 50-50s.
Yeah, well, this one definitely more so. Especially since Sydney did actually beat Fremantle in their home turf. Admittedly, when Freo were looking a bit flaky, didn't quite get their offensive setup go. And I think that's where it's going to be. Offensive setup. If Fremantle can make more of their forward 50 entries, we saw how Sydney were able to adjust to the threat of the Bulldogs. Obviously, didn't defend well, but you know what I mean. Enough to keep them with it. So, as I said, they have shown at least some of there. But obviously, if Fremantle do much, they're opening a building back half. And that's going to be concerning because Freo aren't good at defending from. they've got players like Warner and Heaney that just love to create from those opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a bit of a bogey matchup, I reckon. I would almost be tempted to tip Sydney here. I don't know if I will. I'm a coward.
I kind of do want to back Sydney in,
Yeah.
just because their performance from last week kind of
Yeah.
give a lot of renewed interest into
Yeah.
like how they really should be looking. Especially if they should be getting Amadi back this week, because he was he out with concussion?
I think he was. Yeah, concussion might have been a week suspension. I'm not too sure.
I can't remember, but if he's back this week, that does give him a lot more up forward. Even if they are going to miss Papley, again, which hasn't helped because they've missed Papley all season long anyway.
Wait, Papley's out?
Was he out with injury?
No. He played a fantastic game.
I'm pretty sure it was subbed out. I don't know. He had cuff awareness. Sorry, you should be fine. He came off with cuff awareness.
Yeah,
that's right. So I mean, maybe that is 50-50 as to whether he actually does play. Just unless they want to just make sure his cuffs are all right.
Yeah, he was.
He should play though.
No way.
But yeah, if Amadi comes back, that's huge for them, and that'll make the battle so much more interesting. Although Freya's defense has been massive past couple of weeks. Like when they stepped up when they've needed to.
Yeah, I think it's more Cox. Ryan's been solid.
Oh, it is 100% more Cox. Like he is leading that back line. Apart from Pierce has had a couple of 50-50 games, but he's doing his best.
Pierce isn't playing.
Oh, true. Yeah. I'm just so used to him being in that back line.
Arnold has covered for him.
Oh, there you go.
And actually did all right. Back to his more prominent role of being a defender.
True.
Unfortunately, picked up the name of Ghostface from my dad because he just looks a bit skinny. He looks a bit
got the kind
I think
of
it's just because it's got
pale on the face kind
sort of thing.
Yeah.
So but he's definitely not playing like he's sick. He's definitely still filling his role. But again, Amadi could be this sort of matchup because they've got nothing. So you'd think that on a good day, Fremantle will be able to do that. But if Sydney are to win, that might be one thing where they might get an unexpected turnaround against them.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. So yeah, it could be a coin flip. This one will likely be the coin flip game of the match. Oh, sorry, of the round. But I would like to see Freo run away with another win in a row. But it is very tempting to go for Sydney in this one.
The Tolls have to play a good game.
Absolutely.
And that only needs to be two of them. I imagine it's most likely Jackson and whoever else decides to lift up.
Yeah, I think so. I think that'll
because Sydney don't really have good Toll defenders, so that is the flip side of that equation.
Agreed. All right, jumping over to our last game of the round, over in Adelaide, at the Adelaide Oval, it's the Crows hosting the Demons. And I know I said this could be the other 50-50 game, but with Melbourne's defense currently looking the way that it is, and Adelaide having the 3-pronged tolls as well, there could be a completely one-sided affair.
Yeah, as I said, I'm not exactly sure about this. It's like theoretically I could see Adelaide absolutely blitzing him. Melbourne have shown signs that they're at least not as pathetic as their first.
Agreed.
Which were atrocious. That being said, as I said, I mean their midfield's gonna have. It's gonna be defending entries, and Melbourne can do that. Again, they've allowed I think it was when I looked at it, the third least inside 50s of all the teams.
I think I think it's right. I think it's correct.
So as I said, it's just been pretty trash defending there. So it's as long as Adelaide, and it will come from how Melbourne play, because Adelaide do like some back half turnover movement. Adelaide, Melbourne can be disciplined. You know what I mean? But it's a lot of things that Melbourne's are doing to prevent a big loss.
Yes.
But I still think Melbourne are capable I reckon it's going to be 40. I just don't see this being a really, yeah. I would probably say I don't know. It's hard to get it's a big step from the you know um Fremantle and Sydney, which should be close to what would be the next best margin, because all of them could probably be 30-point plus
Yeah, it's
score lines.
what the current reality is looking like.
Maybe it is, but yeah, as I said, Melbourne have to do a lot.
Yeah, I'd
Again,
definitely back in the Crows on this one, I think.
yeah.
But that brings us to the end of the episode. I'm just transitioning scene, don't mind me. Thank you all so much for coming to hang out, coming to watch, coming to listen, coming to like and subscribe and follow and all the other things that are good for the algorithm. We don't have all too much coming up this week, I don't think. Just another back to the big rounds of footy, 9 games, a lot of information to take in. Hopefully some close games this week. Hopefully not too many blowouts. Be sure to go check out our socials, of course, down here. Be sure to go check out my socials and Cyrek's socials. Not that he does too much on them, but it's there just in case. You never know.
Never know.
I'll be streaming this week as per normal. I've been trying to keep pretty consistent with that. I'm doing at least Tuesdays. Should be doing this Friday. I usually take the second Friday off because of the plasma donation, of course. So it's normally Tuesday, Friday, and then usually a day on the weekend at minimum. So I try to keep minimum 3 days. But it's going well. I might I don't know yet, but I might appear at Marvel Stadium for the St Kilda Hawthorn game. I'm very, very, very up in the air on that one, but I kind of want to watch this game, to be honest. That's all there is to it. So who knows? But otherwise, thank you all so much for coming to hang out with us. And we will hopefully see you all next week for episode 66 of the podcast. So until then, take care.